Good morning and welcome. My name is Angie Banks, and I am the Chief Financial Officer for the St. Louis Public Schools District. This morning, we are joining you from Bashan High School, the junior ROTC location. There's also a vaccine event going on this morning in the auditorium from 9 to noon, so feel free to join us if you need a vaccine or a booster. This is our third and final budget forum. You'll be able to find this presentation and a copy of our current year budget on the website. I'll spend about 15 or 20 minutes on the presentation, and Dr. Adams and I will be available to respond to any questions or comments that you may have. Here's the agenda we'll cover at a high level, including our strategic initiatives which drive the budget development process, community participation over the past few years, the current year upgrade and ESSER 2 plans, preliminary fiscal year 2023 budget, both revenues and expenditures as compared to prior years. And finally, we'll enlist your recommendations and suggestions for fiscal year 2023 and respond to any questions you may have. Transformation Plan 3.0 is the district's strategic plan. All initiatives align with one or more of the 5 pillars of Transformation Plan 3.0 to support excellent schools, advance equity and fairness, cultivate cultural responsiveness, focus on student reading as our core, and collaborate with our partners. Budget development process. These are the high-level steps of the budget process every year, starting with strategic alignment to Transformation Plan 3.0. Budget development starts with planning, which we are in right now. There are various phases of budget development, starting with the planning through preparation, adoption, implementation, and evaluation. You can see the general timeframe for each of these phases on the right-hand lower section of the slide. Now, budget development is an iterative process where we make adjustments every year and improvements along the way based on events that may influence the process, like a pandemic, consolidation, community feedback, etc. Community participation. Over the past few years, we have marketed heavily through our website, social media outlets, newsletters, principal messaging in the American, and in other ways. We've offered 3 forums each year and responded to questions. We've also posted the videos on our website. We've had several consolidation meetings, ESSER surveys, and other feedback opportunities through Let's Talk, and now our new feedback line, We Hear You. Again this year, we welcome your feedback and suggestions for next year's fiscal year 2023 budget. So let's get right into the numbers, starting with the current year, fiscal year 2022 budget. Here's the revenue budget by fund category. We have 5 fund categories which are grouped into similar fund types. The general operating budget is the largest fund category at 68% of the revenue budget, and it includes property taxes, sales taxes, state basic formula and transportation revenue, Medicaid, and several other smaller revenue sources. State and federal grants make up 19% of the revenue budget and include all of the entitlement funds, Title I through Title IV, special education, early childhood special education, adult education, Perkins, and the new ESSER, Elementary and Secondary Schools Emergency Relief Funds. And there are several others. Debt service at 7% of the revenue budget is primarily made up of property taxes. Food service represents 4% of the revenue budget and is mostly federal and state reimbursements for our food service expenditures. And then we have our local grants at 2% of the budget, which includes the St. Louis Public Schools Foundation, Parsons Blewett, private donors and contributors, and some other smaller local grants. Of course, we consider all of the revenues to be extremely important and to play a role in the success for our students. Moving on to the fiscal year 2022 expenditures. We have 6 object categories for expenditures, as listed on the lower right-hand side of the graphic. Salaries are the blue and biggest piece of the pie at 42% of the expenditure budget. In addition to regular wages, this category includes substitute pay, temporary staff pay, extra service and overtime pay, and summer school pay. Benefits in orange is the next biggest slice at 20% of the expenditure budget. It includes district paid pension, Social Security, Medicare, and health benefits. So our total payroll expenditures, including both salaries and benefits, comprise 62% of the expenditure budget. Purchase services are 19% of the budget, which include all purchased professional services, property services, transportation services, communication services, insurance, dues, and memberships. Some districts may have a larger percentage of their budget in payroll expenditures if they haven't outsourced some of these professional services, including transportation. Supplies and materials at 9% of the expenditure budget includes everything from general and operating supplies to standardized tests, trophies and incentives, uniforms, textbooks and instructional supplies, furniture, computers, and laptops valued under $1,000 per unit. And you may be surprised that our electric and natural gas utilities are also included in this category. Capital outlay at 4% of the expenditure budget includes depreciable assets and individual items costing more than $1,000 per unit, including land and building improvements, equipment, furniture, computers, and computer software valued over $5,000. Long and short-term debt at 6% of the budget includes principal and interest on nearly $200 million of our outstanding general obligation bonds. Our fiscal year 2022 upgrade plans. This is just a reminder of our upgrade plans, many of which resulted from the consolidation and feedback from the community. Many of these are funded by the general operating budget, with the exception of some salaries, including the reading teachers, family community specialists, and then also ESSER 2 obviously is not funded by the general operating budget, as it is a fund category of its own. So the green numbers after each bullet really identify what the plan was for these upgrades. Many of them are well underway, of course, with the exception of some of the staff upgrades due to the shortages we're experiencing. Also, since ESSER 3, or the American Rescue Plan funds, were announced, we increased the ESSER 2 budget from $20 million to $46 million for the current year. Other additions that were made this year were to increase the extra service rate from $25.52 per hour to $40 per hour, and an increase to the overtime rate from time and a half to double time for all hours in excess of 40 hours per week. The long-term substitute rate was also increased. Those are the most significant increases that were made that may not be included on this slide. This next slide demonstrates the significant investment the federal government has made into public K-12 education in response to the pandemic. Over $200 billion, yes, B billion. St. Louis Public Schools will be the recipient of over $160 million. To date, we have spent the $10.7 million of ESSER 1 funds, and we've rolled out the ESSER 2 budgets in November. We anticipate the reimbursement from E-rate of at least $2.5 million, and we will begin planning for the ESSER 3 funds in earnest to be in the fiscal year 2023 and fiscal year 2024 budgets. ESSER goals. As I'm sure you've all heard about ESSER, Dr. Adams has presented multiple times. The overall goals are to ensure the safe reopening of schools for students and staff, to address the unfinished learning both pre and post-pandemic, and to build lasting and equitable teaching and learning systems for our students. This is how we allocated the $46 million of ESSER 2 funds this year. 4% or $1.8 million for indirect or administrative costs. We wanted to make sure that as many of the funds go directly into the classroom as possible. Therefore, we budgeted 55% or $24.2 million directly to the schools, into their budgets, and 10% or $4.4 million to the academic office. 25% or $11 million was budgeted in operations and facilities, and 5% or $2.2 million each to student support services and technology. Part of the ESSER plan is to ensure that historically underserved populations receive their fair share of additional resources. The district identified 5 student categories in the ESSER funding per student. Since all students were impacted by the pandemic, all students will receive a minimum of $875 of ESSER funding. Now, this per student funding is based on the demographics of each school. So of course the students don't receive checks, but the schools receive funding in their budget based on the student demographics. So $875 for all students. Now, if the student is also eligible to receive free and reduced lunch, which is an income indicator that is different from CEP or community eligibility provision, that student will receive an additional $263 in ESSER funding. If that very same student also has an IEP, individual education plan, she'll receive an additional $438 in ESSER funding. And the same applies for that student if she is homeless, identified as a student in transition, or an English language learner, ELL. So one student, if they fall within all categories, would receive a total of $2,452 in ESSER 2 funding. Now, if a student does not fall within the lower 4 categories, that student still receives the $875 of ESSER 2 funding. Each school has plans to ensure that their student body receives the resources that are most appropriate for them. The schools have included their building steward and parent-teacher organization president in the ESSER planning. Other per student funding. So now that we've discussed the ESSER 2 per student funding, I wanted to let you know about other funds. The general operating budget, or GOB, each student receives $172.50 per student. This is considered discretionary funding and does not include any staffing costs. So these are the spendable dollars in the school budgets. For the Title I funds, the per student funding is anywhere between $580 and $830, and that's really based on family income. So all of that leads up to the preliminary fiscal year 2023 budget. This is a very full slide, and I'll try to walk you through it. The first column of numbers is the fiscal year 2022 projected actuals for the year. This is last year. On the top half, we have our revenues in local, county, state, and federal. And the bottom half in our expenditures in the 6 categories that we discussed earlier. The next column is the fiscal year 2022 budget with some additions. The next column is our preliminary fiscal year 2023 budget. Now, of course, it's preliminary because we just used some percentages from the prior year to estimate what the budget might be. It's the far right column that really tells the story. From a revenue standpoint, you can see that in fiscal year 2023, most of the revenue increase comes from the ESSER 3 funds, which are located under the federal category. That shows, that $50 million shows a change from fiscal year 2022 to 2023. The 2023 revenue budget preliminary is estimated at $487 million. As far as expenditures are concerned, ESSER 3 in fiscal year 2023, about $469 million. From the expenditure standpoint, we have included the negotiated 3% salary increase under the salary category, but the remainder of the funds are really divided between the biggest categories: purchase services, supplies and materials, and capital outlay. And you can see those changes in that far right column. So this really just gives you a 3-year trend as to what the revenues and expenditures may look like, what the changes may look like for fiscal year 2023. We often look at these types of trends to consider what's been working well. What do we need to continue into the next year? Maybe what hasn't worked so well. So when we look at the fiscal year 2023 budget plan, as discussed, we know that the negotiated salary increase will be included. We'll be evaluating the fiscal year 2022 spend and the effectiveness to make some changes. But we do know that there are some costs that are absolutely going to continue into the next year. Transportation, that's a big part of our budget. Facilities, maintaining our facilities and improving them. And of course, ESSER 3, those are big dollars that are also coming. This is where we really want to hear from you. What do you think needs to be included in our fiscal year 2023 budget? What are you hearing from your schools and communities? We need your feedback. The feedback lines are open and we invite you to participate. So thank you for your attention and let us hear from you. Thank you very much and happy holidays.
Thank you, Mrs. Banks, for a great presentation. Yet again, there are a few questions in the queue. The first question is as such: does every school have a parent representative?
That is a wonderful question, and our superintendent would like to come and respond at this point.
Good morning. Excellent question. The intent is for organization. The school does not have an organized PTA. One parent representative should be available to sign. There are two representatives that are supposed to be identified from every single school from the PAC committee. And one of those two representatives or another parent who's involved in the school and who has had conversations with the principal relative to the ESSER budget should sign the document or be the representative for ESSER.
Thank you. To follow up, what does the extra money help a child with? Tutoring, literacy, math, etc.
Absolutely. As the focus for the ESSER funds are to improve the unfinished learning for students, those are all opportunities. And the schools will be making those decisions along with the network superintendents and the academic office to make sure that the appropriate tutoring opportunities are available, whether they're in school or after school. As you know, we're also implementing a new literacy program. So there's lots of professional development going on and opportunities for students to participate with additional learning during school and at home. So all of those options that you brought up are on the table, and the schools are making those decisions for the particular students that need those services the most.
Thank you so much. The last question in the queue: when will the 3% increase occur since so many employees leave the district?
Well, the 3% that I referenced for fiscal year 2023 will be based on that fiscal year. So that will begin July 1st of 2022. And based on the type of employee that you are, teachers don't begin until sometime in August. So it will begin whenever their year begins. But for central office staff that are 12-month staff, that will be effective on July 1st, 2022.
Thank you. If you could provide a little more clarity regarding how the gap in parent engagement will be addressed.
Dr. Adams.
The ESSER dollars are geared toward, as Ms. Banks has already indicated, and as the federal government has indicated to us, to address the learning that has not taken place as a result of the pandemic. And so the belief and hope is that parents will be engaged as a result of being involved in that process, as we do tutoring, as we do extended school day, as we look to buy additional materials and supplies to support students. And so really, it's not, the budget itself doesn't address that specifically, but the general concept is, as we are looking to engage parents and students, parents in the ESSER process, meaning the spending of the dollars, the use of the dollars, engaging students in extended learning. Parents can and will be engaged as a result of that, but the dollars themselves are not specifically designated to try to get parents engaged, but vicariously as a result of getting students more engaged in their own learning, parents come along as a result of that process.
One additional question. How many children are on the individual reading plan as discussed?
That is a number we can provide to you. All schools have individual reading plans at the elementary level, and we can provide that information. Don't have that information directly in front of me, but all schools that have reading teachers designated for that purpose, and I think that number is 29 or 31, have individual reading plans. We can provide that information to you in the chat or on our website on Monday.
Thank you. There are no further questions.
Thank you.